has substantially upgraded its projection for UK growth. It says that this year it believes the economy will increase not by 0.4%, but by 1.1%. That's the largest upward revision for any advanced economy. That look predicts strengthening growth as falling inflation and interest rates stimulate demand. Its projection of 1.5% of GDP growth for the next year remains unchanged. The IMF's chief economist was asked whether the UK should target falling debt.
When countries have elevated debt levels, when interest rates are high, when growth is okay but not great, there is a risk that things could escalate or get out of control quickly. And so there is a need to bring debt levels down, stabilize them when they are not stabilized, and rebuild fiscal buffers. That is true for many countries around the world. And if you're not doing that, and that's getting to the question that was asked by the gentleman on the right here, if you're not doing that, that's when you find yourself potentially later on at the mercy of market pressures that will force an adjustment that is uncontrolled to a large extent, at which point you have very few degrees of freedom. So you don't want to get in that position, and I think the effort to stabilize public debt has to be seen in that context.
Well, unsurprisingly, the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, has welcomed this news. She said it is welcome that the IMF have upgraded a growth forecast for this year, but I know there is more work to do. That is why the budget next week will be about fixing the foundations to deliver change so we can protect working people, fix the National Health Service and rebuild Britain. But there is some less good news for the government, as new figures out today show that borrowing in the financial year so far has surged past the official forecasts. The Office for National Statistics said the government's borrowing rose to £16.6 billion last month. That's up £2.1 billion year on year, and it marks the third highest September borrowing since records began. The ONS said that public sector borrowing in the first half of the financial year stood at some £79.6 billion. Again, that's £1.2 billion more than the same period last year. And it's £6.7 billion higher than forecast by the independent fiscal watchdog, the Office for Budget Responsibility. The government has defended its inflation-busting settlement for public sector workers, which has added billions to those costs.
It was right to settle the strikes that were strife across public services under the last Conservative government because it was costing the economy and taxpayers £3 billion a year. But the budget on the 30th of October will get a grip of public finances and start to fix the foundations so we don't have to go through that trouble again in future years.
That's Darren Jones, the Chief Secretary of the Treasury, speaking a little earlier. Now, the leaders of some of the world's biggest economies are meeting today, but Western powers are not among them, representing some 45% of the world's population and 35% of its economy. The BRICS group is being hosted in Russia by Vladimir Putin. He's many reasons for wanting it to succeed, given, of course, the sanctions his country is facing from the West because of the war in Ukraine. He's hoping actually also to build a platform for international payments that could get around those sanctions, and he'd hoped challenge the dollar. Let's speak to our Moscow correspondent, Ivor Bennett, who joins us down the line. Very good afternoon to you, Ivor. Just first of all, just remind us what the BRICS is and what a coup, I suppose, this is for Vladimir Putin that he's getting to host these world leaders in Russia.
Yeah, hi Darren. So originally BRICS was this informal grouping of emerging economies. The acronym was dreamt up by Jim O'Neill from Goldman Sachs at the turn of the century. Originally it was just BRIC, just 4 countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China. Their first summit was in 2009. South Africa joined in 2010 to make it into BRICS. And the aim supposedly was to recalibrate the global economy in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis, to make it less reliant and less centred on the US. But for more than a decade, the group was really dismissed by economists as a bit of an alphabet soup, its members too spread out and too different from one another to achieve anything of substance. Having said that, in the last few years, they do seem to have got their act together, and they have grown in size, grown in relevance and grown in prominence, with 5 members now becoming 9. The likes of Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran and the UAE have joined in the last year. Saudi Arabia has been invited too. And according to Russia, at least, more than 30 countries have either expressed interest in joining the club or at the very least forging closer ties. And for Vladimir Putin, this is exactly what he wants. He wants to build BRICS up into this powerful rival to the Western world, both politically and economically, create what he keeps calling a new world order. And the optics this week, as you say, are very important indeed. Here we are, 2.5 years into the war in Ukraine, and he is shaking hands with more than 20 heads of state, the likes of China's Xi Jinping, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi, even the Turkish President Erdogan. He's here, the head of a NATO member state, and the message from the Kremlin is loud and clear. They are saying that the West's attempt to isolate Russia haven't worked. Instead of losing friends, Russia is still making them.
Yeah, and Ivor, as you said, this is not just simply about politics, but economics too, with Putin very much putting this idea of a new financial system, if you like, or a currency system at the heart of this conference in order to challenge the dollar to a degree, but potentially also to get around Western sanctions.
Yeah, this alternative system is top of the agenda here. It's been called the BRICS Bridge, and it's supposedly going to rival the SWIFT system for international payments. And Vladimir Putin hopes it will end the dominance of the dollar and essentially sanction-proof his economy and those of the other BRICS members. Because as much as people say that sanctions haven't had the desired effect, they have still caused Russia some problems. Russia's been cut off from international markets, and more recently they've had difficulties with cross-border trade, processing payments even from friendly countries like China because they're all linked to the dollar. Vladimir Putin wants to get round all that by creating this entirely new financial system to process payments, but also a new commodities exchange, a new reinsurance company, a new clearing centre, a new ratings agency. Will it happen this week? Very unlikely, and I think that's for two reasons. One, it's still in its infancy, this idea. There's a lot of details still to iron out, but more importantly, perhaps, not every member of BRICS shares Vladimir Putin's anti-Western sentiment. The likes of Brazil and India, they are really still trying to play both sides. They have strong ties to the West as well as with Russia, and they don't want to be seen, I think, to be doing anything that's too anti-Western or too pro-Russia, to help it support its war in Ukraine and get round sanctions. Next year might be different when Brazil has the chair of the group, when it's a less toxic atmosphere for BRICS. But this year, almost certainly, this won't happen.
OK, Ivor, thanks for that. That's Ivor Bennett there, our Moscow correspondent, joining us from Kazan in Russia. Now, let's move on and talk about football, because Premier League clubs have been meeting league officials today to discuss changes to financial regulations. The legality of some rules has been called into question after Manchester City challenged spending rules, creating splits in the Premier League. So what is at stake for the league, and can the divisions be healed? Delighted to say, joining me in the studio is Rob Harris, our sports correspondent. Good afternoon to you, Rob. Words like civil war have been talked about today. Just how serious is this for the Premier League, and what is really fundamentally at play?
Well, the league is riven by splits, in part sparked by City. Manchester City, the winners of the last 4 titles, taking on the Premier League's rules, all trying to ensure they can spend on the players to sustain that success. But the spending rules do limit the losses that are allowed, which then encourage you to generate income. And the accusation is that is inflated income from companies related to Manchester City's Abu Dhabi ownership. Now, there's a lot of contention over the partial legal victory they scored a few weeks ago at an arbitration tribunal, a hearing that they sought because City portrayed it as outright victory. The Premier League believe they won on some counts. Now, parts of the regulations around profit and sustainability rules were found to be unlawful and unfair, and now they're having to close that gap to adjust the regulations, and that's what they're meeting over today, to reconfigure those rules. They are on complex, narrow areas, but very consequential, in part about ensuring that if you do a deal with a related party, say for City in the United Arab Emirates, you have access early on to the value of a deal if any other club was going to do it, say with an airline, not as previously at the final stage, then you're left lodging appeals. Also, a key area are shareholder loans. Now, some clubs have interest-free shareholder loans, and City successfully got the tribunal to rule that those are also anti-competitive, and the fact that they should now be judged at fair market value. So if you've got a loan, the payments that you would be expected to be liable for on the general market should count towards your losses. But there was rows over that. I understand some clubs, the wealthy, are saying they could get more favourable rates for the loans. The smaller clubs potentially wouldn't be able to get as favourable rates. So how you configure those rules, more complexities around that, more splits and divisions and bigger legal fees.
And at the heart of this, Rob, what we've got is clearly an incredibly successful league. It is a world leader, isn't it? The Premier League known all over the world now. In some ways, these are kind of the pains of too much success, if you like, or of success itself, in the sense that you've got now very, very wealthy clubs, other clubs that aren't quite as wealthy, and they're just rubbing up against each other because they have got different ambitions and different, potentially global prospects.
Yes, and these profit sustainability rules were found by the tribunal to be necessary to ensure a competitive and sustainable league. The whole reason for these rules prevent clubs going out of business, spending beyond their means, and the attempt to ensure that the league is competitive. Part of the global appeal is the fact that the sense is the title isn't wrapped up with weeks to go. All the places are in playoff and through the league right the way near to the end of the season. But there is still one huge bigger case, again involving Manchester City. It's costing the Premier League tens of millions in legal fees, which is angering clubs. This case known as 115, where they're accused of deception going back to the 2009-10 season around payments, sponsorships, filtering money around UAE, all in an attempt to inflate that revenue. City do deny wrongdoing.
Fascinating, and it is one that's going to roll on, isn't it? Rob, thank you very much indeed. Rob Harris there, our sports correspondent in the studio. Let's bring you up to date with the rest of the business news now, and the former chief executive of Abercrombie and Fitch, that's Mike Jeffries, has been arrested in the United States on sex trafficking and prostitution charges. The arrest follows years of allegations about sexual misconduct made in civil lawsuits. One accused Abercrombie of allowing Mr Jeffries to run a sex trafficking organisation during his 22 years with the company. Water and wastewater companies have proposed increasing bills by the end of this decade by an average of 40% compared with current levels. All but one of the companies are proposing the bills to go up by even more than they initially requested in July. Southern Water is proposing, don't mind the pun here, an eye-watering 84% increase, the most of any company. In Battled, Thames Water is proposing an increase of 53%. The final decision will rest with the regulator Ofwat, who will decide in December by how much bills can rise. Well, speaking earlier on Business Live, David Henderson, the head of the Water Industries Trade Association, argued that more investment was urgently needed.
This investment cost is on the back of bills falling in real terms year after year after year. If they'd merely risen with inflation since 2010, they'd be about a quarter higher than they are today. And as a direct expense of not having invested in the past, we don't have infrastructure that is able to cope increasingly with the pressures placed on it by climate change, population growth, businesses that need to expand, and homes that need to be built. So we desperately need this investment. We're very keen for Ofwat to give us the green light so we can get on with it.
And don't forget, you can get more on that and indeed all the latest money stories on our money blog. Just scan the QR code on your screen now and log in. Now, a new online investment app has been launched specifically for women called Propel. Its aim is to transform how women think about and engage with their finances and to enable them to grow their wealth. Well, joining me now is Aisha Oforai, who is the founder of the company. A very good afternoon to you, Aisha. Just talk about what you're trying to achieve with this new app.
Sure, thanks for having me. So the whole purpose behind Propel is to help women in particular boost their investment confidence such that they can start to invest their money over the long term to build up sustainable long-term wealth. Because, you know, in the UK, there is quite a substantial gender pension gap. It's around 40%. And also there is a large gender investment gap. So we want to focus on helping women to put their money to work so that they have something for themselves in later life.
And Aisha, is this a structural thing? And I ask that question as in, is it because these models, whatever, are more aimed or work better for men or bigger societal structural issues? Or is it education? Because, you know, when you look at university degrees and even when you look at maths, you know, women are way ahead of men at the moment. Well, which one is it?
I think it's a combination of both. I think a lot of the existing platforms that exist today have been created and built by men. So I wouldn't say that they deliberately tried to exclude women. I think a lot of these platforms were built to be neutral. But actually, when it comes to money, finances, and investing, what we found is that you do need to be very specific and tailor things towards how women think about things like risk, their money, and investing if you do want to attract them. And I think when you think about the wider topic, money, investing, and these kind of things isn't something that women tend to openly talk about. Whereas I think what you find with men, they might talk to each other about their investments, whether it be down the pub or in various different WhatsApp groups. They're just not conversations that women have typically been having or are having today. And that's something that we also want to try and change. But, if you think back, not even that long ago, women still needed their husband's permission, for example, to be able to buy property and things like that. So if you look at where we're coming from, it isn't surprising that women aren't in the same place as men, but absolutely something has to be done.
And Aisha, one of the places, just finally on this, where there is a conversation we had now is online, particularly on social media apps, though we heard from the FCA today saying that they want to take tougher action against potentially rogue influencers. Do you feel that's a concern, that actually some people are now being roped into kind of dodgy investments online?
Absolutely. I think particularly with just how people consume information today, we get a lot of our information online, and particularly with younger generations, they do tend to follow influencers, or in this case, finfluencers. And oftentimes they take what they see to be the truth and may act upon these things. But if those influencers aren't, or aren't sophisticated financially, they may not be providing advice in the right way, which can have terrible outcomes for consumers who sort of take it as gospel truth and then potentially act or invest on what they're seeing.
OK, really fascinating stuff. Really appreciate your time, Aisha from Propel there this afternoon. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you very much.
You're watching Sky News, you're watching Business Live. We're up in a couple of minutes after this quick break, looking at the markets this Tuesday. All the details in just a couple of minutes. Stay tuned.
I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's chief correspondent.
An enormous explosion has just come down. I think it was a monster just landed in between us.
Hundreds and hundreds of people hoping to get north, ultimately to get to the United States. It's a border where they're not welcome, and yet they keep coming.
We saw snatch squads going in, grabbing people, taking them out and putting them into trucks and taking them away.
They make about 50 kilos of fentanyl a week. It's incredibly dangerous and toxic stuff.
There's been an upsurge in deaths. The fighting between the gangs is getting more and more vicious.
Is this now all your territory?
Yeah.
The battlefield is outside the barricades, which is over there. This is much more like a normal town. It's really sending a clear message that Venezuela is eager for change. We're being crushed.
Free from wherever you get your news. We are in the middle of a forest, in a jungle really, and they're attempting to keep these men alive. This is real, hardcore emergency medicine. The information on this could bring down the entire network, not just in Iraq and Syria, but across the world. Sky News, the full story first.
Well, hundreds of thousands of people have been using the beast for years to traverse Mexico, but it is really dangerous. Many people have died riding it.
The most significant day of this conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Heavy vehicle.
Why only in America?
People want their country to work.
They want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That
News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
This is the game changer seat. Look, it even comes with binoculars. Fly Emirates, fly better.
Welcome back to Business Live. Let's take a look at the markets now, and it's been a mixed picture in Europe today. Continental markets mostly down as investors assess disappointing earnings from bellwether firms, slightly buoyed by the tech giants like SAP. The FTSE is down around 0.1%, also following a difficult day's trading. It's been weighed down by the likes of the insurer Admiral and the Phoenix Group. On the upside, the mining company Fresnillo has shone through again as gold remains high. Record highs, actually, we've seen in recent times. Stateside, the benchmark S&P 500 is down 0.25%. All the US markets currently trading downwards following negative sentiment around the future Fed rate cuts. On the currencies, as we can see, a bit of a mixed bag for the pound today, down a little against the dollar, up very, very little against the euro. And oil prices have also risen slightly following last week's sell-off, with the stimulus measures in China helping raise things a little, just up over 2% at nearly $76 a barrel. Well, joining me now is Sanjeev. He is the head of equities at Wraithbourne Investment Management. Sanjeev, very good afternoon to you. We're actually going to start, if we can, with the owners of the Holiday Inn. That's the Intercontinental Hotels Group. And they've had a bit of a downturn, haven't they, in terms of revenue per room? Why do we think that is?
Yeah, I mean, I think the results were broadly in line, the Q3 trading statement, but the revenue per room's grown by about 1.5% in the third quarter. That's a little bit slower than their normal pace, which is normally more like 3%. I mean, we've got to remember with the hotel companies, they saw obviously a big downturn in demand in 2020 with COVID, when no one was traveling either for business or leisure. And then as recovery out of COVID happened, they saw kind of a real catch up. So we've now reached the end of it, and business is back to above levels of where it was in 2019. So there's an element of kind of the prior year trading being very strong, particular China, for example, where they said sales, or RevPAR was down 10% in Q3. We've got to remember this time last year, China was benefiting from the end of the zero COVID policy, and it saw a surge in travel. So it's quite hard to match that kind of pent up demand that we saw in 2023.
Let's move on to aerospace. RTX have adjusted their profits, and it's looking good.
It is indeed, yeah. RTX was formed in 2020 through a merger of a defence company, Raytheon, which makes missile defence systems and missiles like Patriot missiles, and they merged with the civil aerospace businesses of United Technologies. So these are Collins Aerospace, which makes mechanical and electrical parts for aircraft and seats as well, and then the Pratt & Whitney business, which makes aero engines, which are hugely complex, running at many hundreds of degrees Celsius in temperature. Things can occasionally go wrong in these aero engines, and we saw that last year with their geared turbofan. They had a crack in one of the compressors in it, and that cost them several billion. So no more bad news on that front, and Raytheon is really benefiting from sustained defence spending and demand in an increasingly uncertain world, and also continued recovery in commercial aerospace demand as people are flying more.
Yeah, fascinating stuff. And just very quickly, got about 30 seconds, Sanjeev, talk to me about Danaher and the health sector.
Yeah, well, Danaher is a really interesting business. It's definitely not a household name. It makes consumables for kind of diagnostics, testing, and a lot to do with the drug discovery industry, so supplying to biotechs, pharmaceutical companies, and it's really benefiting from the growth in areas like genomics and gene editing, and biologic drugs, which are making proteins and things which are much more complex to make than little white pills, which is kind of the old area of pharmaceuticals. So it's benefiting from all those long-term trends. In the very short term, the biotech industry has been a bit small because of funding.
Sanjeev in the city, thank you very much indeed. That's it from me today. I'm back again, of course, at 11:30. The News Hour is up next. Stay tuned.